Hi, I'm Chip Hardwick. I'm the executive for the Synod of the Covenant, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this workshop with our partners at Science for the Church. I'll introduce our presenter, Drew Rick Miller, more fully in a second. But Drew, we're glad you're here. Glad all of you that are here live on Zoom are checked in, and all of you who will be watching it later, we're so glad to have you here. I'm going to share just a couple of things going on in the life of the Synod first, and then we'll turn it over to Drew. Let's see. And I wonder if you all see this. You see this yet? Katie or Francie, do you see that? Great, thank you. I want to let you know about a webinar we have starting next month. It's on Thursdays from 10 to 11:30 to address clergy loneliness. If you are a clergy who sometimes feels like you're isolated from others, you're in good company. When this first newsletter went out for this workshop, I think there were 4 people that signed up within like 5 minutes. So this is a real need. If you are a clergy person, or if you love a clergy person who is struggling with loneliness, I would encourage you to sign up for this webinar. We also are providing boundaries training if you are required to take boundaries training, or if you want to learn more about boundaries training. The next one is in April, but we're also offering it again in October and November. We'll also have a childhood sexual assault prevention training that will be in September, and we're working on an anti-racism training as well. These will cover all of the mandatory trainings that you will have if the overtures from General Assembly pass. I also want to tell you about the Leaders Table, which I'm really excited about. This is a program that has been developed by a real leader in the missional church movement, taking what he has learned and adopting it and adapting it for today's culture, where we have polarized politics and technological change and the decline of the mainline church. And the question is, how do we lead in these situations? And so Alan Roxborough is going to be having several videos and a cohort group that will be in the fall. But if you'd like to learn now about what that will be, on May 10th, there'll be a Zoom event where you can come and learn more about what that will be like. Also, I want to let you know that our higher education scholarships for Christian leaders are available. The applications will be available by April 15th, and they'll be due by May 31st. These are for students in undergrad or in an associate's program or vocational school, or theology students for their first master's. So we'd love to be able to support folks in your churches in their studies. Of course, today we're here for Science for the Church, for this with Drew Rick Miller. I'm going to stop this share, and I want to tell you a little bit about Drew. Drew is the co-director of Science for the Church, and he's the lead editor of the weekly email. We've just been talking about how good that weekly email is, and he's the lead editor for that. He has worked for 10 years at the John Templeton Foundation. So he's got that background. And we were classmates at Princeton Seminary. Drew has been a good friend to me. One of my favorite memories I was thinking of Drew is how he coached this basketball team called Cheese to the Rescue. And it was a co-ed intramural team. And I was kind of their cheerleader. And he did everything he could to get me on the court. And I refused with every fiber of my being. But he did it in good. He was so encouraging, and he's still encouraging today. Drew, thank you so much for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you, and just let me know about the slides, and I will.
Thanks, I appreciate it, Chip. Yeah, he's now got to coach me through PowerPoint because I couldn't get my computer to share it over Zoom. So thank you, Chip, for helping there. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're just thrilled to partner with the Synod and to help the church engage topics that we're all wrestling with. And in the case of this webinar, the topic being mental health. I want to frame it in a little different way. We've got experts in mental health. I am not a mental health care provider or a mental health professional. We have them coming in the next 2 weeks to guide you, but I want to frame our conversation a little bit more broadly on well-being more generally, and particularly how faith contributes to well-being. And I think you'll see many ways that mental health is a major factor in this connection. So that's what I want to kind of journey us through today, laying some groundwork for our presenters the next 2 weeks. Go ahead and advance, Chip. So I want to begin with just some of the data that is out there. You're all on this webinar because you're aware there's a mental health issues, concerns that we're facing. And it's interesting that 9 out of 10 Americans in a poll conducted last October are aware that there's a mental health crisis in our country. So everybody is feeling this. And it's, we feel it in so many aspects of the news and the headlines, the things we're dealing with. We've all seen headlines about increases in crime and violence, increases in addiction, increases in overdoses and suicide. Not all of these are solely the result of mental health issues, but poor mental health is certainly a contributing factor. The CDC now estimates that 1 out of 5 Americans has diagnosed mental illness. And my hunch is that number is even higher if you account for people that have not been diagnosed. So this is a severe crisis. And in the church, we feel it. It's among our members. It's in our community. It's even among our leadership. Navigating churches through pandemics and social turmoil and a whole host of things have made it difficult. And the psychologists are now telling us that clergy show more signs of trauma than post-deployment military individuals today. More trauma for clergy than they're seeing in military post-deployment. So this is taking a significant toll on the church, on the leadership in the church, and our broader society. And so this is the reason we as the church need to be talking about these issues. Next slide. So I want to do it in a somewhat different way. I want to tackle it from the perspective of, does what we do in church help us? Can the things that we do every day in church benefit our health? Can the things you're doing to try to create healthy community, to nurture Christian disciples, are there real benefits to that? And specifically, can scientists measure that? And so what I really want to do, next slide, is put Jesus to the test, you might say. So you all know these parables where Jesus heals other individuals. And repeatedly, he says, your faith has made you well. The one I have on the screen now, or that Chip has on the screen now, is the woman who is hemorrhaging, who touches Jesus's cloak. Jesus feels the power leave him, engages the woman, and then the story ends with him saying, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Next slide. We have it also with the story of blind Bartimaeus. Another example of Jesus healing after engaging someone and saying, your faith has made you well. Next slide. And so that's the question I want to ask. Does our faith make us well? Is that statement true? And is there evidence for it? And bear with me, but I think you'll see throughout the presentation how mental health is a key factor as we move through. Next slide. So I want to begin just with a couple comments that frame the conversation. The first one is, who is healing? Our bodies are remarkably good at healing on their own. So most issues we have, our bodies are wonderfully made and they take care of it just fine. But there are other instances where we need a little bit of help. And the two most common places where we get help are medical science. And then for much of the world, there's healing direct from God. The accounts of spiritual healing across the globe are plentiful and abundant. And so at Science for the Church, at presentations like this, we're not saying it's only medical science or it's only natural healing and there's no room for God to heal, nor are we saying that it's only God that can heal, that there's no room for medical science. And in fact, the argument I would make is that probably much of the healing today that we experience, at least here in the West, probably comes from God working through our bodies and through medical professionals and the treatments they've created. So instead of an either or, I want to have a both and kind of perspective in thinking about healing. Next slide. So one of the classic science and religion topics is the mind-body, or questions of, is there a soul? And that's a great topic. We can set up a whole webinar on that, and fascinating conversations can happen. The point I want to make today is that the mind and the body are connected. Whether you believe there's something distinct, ascribed to dualism or something of that sort, the reality is there is a connection. And what happens to us mentally impacts our bodies, and what happens to our bodies impacts us mentally. That connection is there. There's this web, and our spiritual well-being is another factor here that I think is mostly mediated through the mind. And so our spiritual well-being is a third piece that it contributes here. Next slide. And those of you who are parents know this really well. I've got 3 daughters. They're not quite as young as they were anymore, but the amount of emotional distress when a knee gets skinned is pretty amazing. The physical pain leading to emotional distress. And then you give them a kiss, you pat them on the head, you put a Band-Aid on the knee, and wow, now that emotional distress is all gone. And the physical pain pretty quickly can go away oftentimes. That connection is there, and there's many, many examples of it, and it goes in both directions. Physical pain can cause emotional, mental distress, and vice versa. Mental, emotional distress can cause physical pain. Next slide. And the way that most commonly happens is through the neurochemicals that go through our brain. Things like cortisol, the stress hormone, as it's sometimes known. And these things are generally good for us in short doses. So when you've got a car that's coming at you and you need to get out of the way, you want cortisol to hit really quickly to give you the energy and the attention to move out of the way. But you don't want that cortisol, that kind of intense stress, to be in your body all the time. That's a real indicator of poor health if you have high levels of stress for long periods of time. And so our bodies are well made to take care of us in certain situations, but if we maintain that stress and that anxiety, it's going to impact not just our mental health, but it's going to impact our physical health. Next slide. And then one more example, probably my favorite of the connection. It's fascinating to go read about studies of placebos. It's amazing what a sugar pill can do. And it's really just evidence that our minds really do have an impact over our bodies. The discomfort, the illness, the injury, the ailments that are healed through things like placebos. It's really quite remarkable. And so I really want to double down and emphasize this connection between the mind and the body as we move into these questions of, does our faith make us well? Next slide. So let's get into that question. Does it make us well? What's the scientific evidence? And so let's next slide. Let's start with the Mayo Clinic. This is one of the shortest, most succinct, richest summaries of probably now thousands of studies and research papers at the interface of faith and well-being, faith and health. I'll let you read it. The links between involvement and better religious involvement and better health outcomes, things like longevity, coping skills, health-related quality of life, and things that relate directly to mental health, less anxiety, less depression, lower rates of suicide. And then some studies that show an improvement in recovery from illness. So there's a lot more that could be included. These are some of the things that there is the strongest evidence for. Multiple studies, multiple populations being studied have shown these things to generally be true. And so next slide, let's dive into that first one, longevity. It is fairly well established now that people who partake regularly of religious faith, religious community, it's not exclusively the church, although many of the subjects that have been studied do go to church, that they live longer. Faith seems to benefit us in terms of longevity and the participation in our church communities. Next slide. And if we can get it to work, I want to show a segment of a video with a researcher at Vanderbilt who led one of these studies to just share a little bit about his research, which mirrors the research of several others. So Chip, let's hit play and see if we can get it to work.
Yeah, I need to just stop. I don't think when I shared it, I chose the share sound box. So let me do that again. Let's try this one.
Dr. Bruce is at Vanderbilt, where he's done his research. And as he'll tell you in the video, he's also clergy. So he's got a particular interest in this work. Is it not working for you, Chip?
Well, nope, that's not the one I want. I'm just looking to see where the play button is.
Try clicking the middle of the screen. It's a YouTube video that's embedded. See if we can get it to work. If it doesn't, we'll just fast forward and I can summarize some of what he says. We're going to send everybody a bibliography. And so a lot of these links and this video are things that I'll make sure are in there so that you can go back and watch them. Don't worry about it if you can't, Chip.
I can't find it. Sorry, everybody.
That's all right. The next slide will show one of the key papers that came out of his study. And a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. So first, they studied, I think it was over 5,000 40 to 65-year-olds and looking to see what benefits regular participation in worship services and in faith communities brought. And it reduced the risk for mortality by 55% in their study. Other studies have shown slightly lower rates, 20 to 30, I think is kind of the average. This was one of the more significant ones, but I don't know if you can read under that section that says importance. And the last line there, the last few words talk about reduced stress. So again, there's this link to mental health, reduced stress being a major factor in conferring these benefits that they're seeing between regular participation in a faith community and longevity. All right, next slide. Let's change gears and let's look on the other end of life. Let's talk about young people, adolescents, teens. And so the big risks to teenagers, according to the researchers, are depression, addiction, and risky behavior, or substance abuse rather than addiction. And so a group at Harvard back in 2018 did a major study of young people to see what benefits does participation in a faith community, do practices like prayer have for young people. Next slide. And I'm blowing this up, so hopefully you can see some of this. Participation in church lowers depression by 12%. Prayer and things reduce sexual activity among young people. And then on the bottom, the data shows some of the benefits. So going to church, 18% more happy, 87% more forgiving, 38% more likely to volunteer, and 47% have a deeper sense of meaning and purpose. And what is not on this slide, and you may know, you may not know, is that everything on that bottom row, meaning, purpose, happiness, forgiveness, volunteering, generosity, every one of those, I could do an entire presentation full of data that shows how they benefit us. Higher levels of things like gratitude confer health benefits, and many of those benefits are reduced anxiety, lower levels of stress, depression, and then a correlate of health benefits and other things. And so there seems to be this connection kind of at both ends, that church seems to really benefit us. Next slide.
Are you going to take questions at the end, Drew?
I am.
Yeah, okay.
So another real popular area at the interface of kind of faith and health is around prayer. What are the benefits of prayer to us? And this is a complicated area because prayer varies quite a bit. And some people say it might not be wise to test God the way some of the prayer studies have been designed. And so studies that look at intercessory prayer and look at the impact on the one being prayed for, they're pretty muddled, and it's pretty hard to draw any conclusions. Some of them say pretty clearly it doesn't look like prayer helps, and some of them seem to say pretty clearly it does. Where there is consensus and where there does seem to be a benefit is prayer and meditation and the impact it has on the one praying. And again, like you're hearing, reduced stress is probably the most common benefit of regular prayer practices, regular meditation, as well as things like better concentration, improved attention, reduced memory loss. And then I could go on and on and on. Again, many, many studies, many, many benefits. The ones I listed: reduced stress, better concentration, improved attention, reduced memory losses, seem to be some of the most established ones that I find in the data there. So prayer, the practices that we do as a faith community, they too seem to benefit us. Next slide. And so all of this research together has some medical professionals asking what I think is a fascinating question. And feel free as you hear me talk to go into chat and answer whether you think how you would answer this question. Should doctors prescribe church? If there's so much evidence that regular participation in church is good for us, should doctors prescribe it? Next slide. And so you have a Harvard medical researcher that's one of the leaders conducting this research. He led that 2018 study of adolescents, among many others. He wrote an op-ed in the USA Today back in 2016 and basically argued, we have a miracle drug in religion, and it's a short drive away, and it confers these benefits, things that we should want as a society. Why would we not prescribe church? Why wouldn't doctors want what's best for their patients, and therefore to prescribe, get more involved in whatever is your faith community? It's a fascinating question, but it tells you how strong the evidence is within the medical research for the benefits that particularly church, worship, regular participation in a faith community confer on us. Next slide. But of course, whenever you're dealing with science, you always have to have a few caveats. So it is not universally good for us. There are examples. The biggest one would be is if you are in a toxic church, if you are in a church that is creating trauma and distress for many, that is not going to confer these benefits. That's going to have the opposite effect. Likewise, people that struggle with guilt and shame, people that feel like God is punishing them through an illness, or people that hold grudges and are unable to forgive someone. There are ways that we internalize our faith and our beliefs that can have very negative health outcomes. There's wonderful work. The video is old and it's hard to show, on forgiveness that showed a woman remembering a partner who abused her while having a simple, I think it was blood pressure or pulse. I think it was a machine reading her pulse. And the minute the researcher asked her to remember, her pulse just went through the roof. And so every time she recalls that experience, you get this influx in stress and anxiety. And carrying that for long periods of time is going to have a negative impact on your health. Next slide. All right, let's change gears a little bit and ask why all of this might be the case. Why does it seem like church benefits it? What is it about what we do in church that seems to confer these benefits, or that seem to help religious people live longer and have reduced levels of stress and anxiety and depression and all of these things? Next slide. So the most common answer is social support or community support. It's the fellowship that we do. It's the way we support one another. It's the way in a church, it's hard for people to be lonely, especially a healthy community that is including everyone. There's all sorts of benefits for the things we do with a community that supports and lifts us up. Social support, we are, human beings are created to be in relationship. That's how our minds are wired. That's how we thrive. We struggle when we're alone. We thrive in community for the most part. And so having healthy communities that support us, it's really good for us. And most of the researchers would say, if it's not the primary factor, it's one of the key factors in why we see these benefits for people that regularly participate in a faith community. Next slide. So another interesting finding is that religious patients are more likely to follow up on treatment. And so another reason we experience these benefits is we seem better at coping, better at following through on treatment. We've got the social support that can help us with both of those things. And so whatever struggles we face with our health, we tend to follow through and to fare better in that process because of the support mechanisms that our churches often provide to us. Next slide. So as I suggested earlier, there's also all of these benefits that come from what you might call the fruits of the Spirit. So everything we do in church to cultivate more loving, more forgiving, more hopeful, more generous, more grateful people, those confer benefits on us. The fruits of the Spirit, the creation of disciples is something that benefits us and has these positive health outcomes. And so this is another reason some have suggested for why people that regularly participate in faith communities and engage in prayer practices and the like seem to receive these benefits. Next slide. There's also some that suggest we take seriously our bodies as Christians. Passages like 1 Corinthians, that the body is a temple and that we are to glorify God with our bodies. And there's a lot of evidence that Christians and other religious groups, we drink less alcohol, we use drugs less often, we participate in risky behaviors and lifestyles less frequently. We smoke less and we're more likely to wear our seatbelts. So a number of things that when we care for our bodies, we follow rules, we follow through on treatment, all of these things about caring for the bodies that God has fearfully and wonderfully made are factors that may contribute to why we have these benefits. Next slide. But again, as I did earlier, there's the other side of the coin here. And there's one area where particularly church folks tend to fare a little bit worse. And that's when it comes to diet and exercise. We like our donuts at coffee hour and we like our potlucks. They're a big part of that social support. They're a big part of who we are. They're not always great for us in terms of diet and exercise. And so there is evidence that in terms of obesity and things of that sort, that we fare a bit worse. So it's not all good news. And then our topic for next week, it's particularly not good news for clergy. It's pretty alarming, some of the research that's coming out on clergy health and well-being, and the many struggles, particularly since the pandemic, that clergy are facing. And so the benefits seem to be more for the communities clergy are supporting and creating than they are on the clergy themselves. And so that's a concern, and that's a big reason next week why we want to focus on clergy health and clergy well-being. All right, next slide. So I want to return to this question of a cause. Is there something physically going on that medical researchers can see that help draw this connection? Next slide. And this is a hard area, and there's not a lot of compelling evidence. Probably the best evidence comes in what you have on your screen here, these little pink tips of our chromosomes. They're called telomeres. And as we live our lives and navigate the difficulties and the stresses, and as we age, our telomeres shorten. And so one way for researchers to compare two people of similar experiences for age is to look at their telomeres. And it's not surprising, given everything else that I just said, that people that regularly attend church, people involved in prayer and meditation practices, you take two people the same age, same circumstances, and one is actively religious and one is not, the actively religious tends to have longer telomeres. So there does seem to be some evidence biologically in us of this benefit. And it's the best that I've seen is this research on telomeres. There's been a little bit that's been on, immune system strength and things of that sort. I think that kind of research is a little bit more debated. Next slide. Go ahead and click it a couple times, Chip. So I want to come back to that. What are the causes here? And I want to reiterate that it can be God shortening our telomeres, and give it one more click, through the work of medical professionals. These things are not mutually exclusive. Everything can be working simultaneously, and that can be exactly how God wants to work and to heal and to help us. All right, let me move towards wrapping up here. And let's, next slide, go ahead and click one more time. So a good way, actually go back one more, Chip. One more. Thank you. So a good way to think about all the research that is summarized in that opening quote, some of which I touched on, is to think of the difference between vaccines and medicine. Something like 80% of the studies that have been done that show these benefits understand the benefits of religion more like a vaccine. They prevent future illness. They protect against bad heart disease or other indicators of poor health. And only 20% show evidence of something like a medicine, a treatment. I have ailment A, I'm going to take treatment B, and that's going to make me better. So most of the evidence suggests faith, the community support, the prayer practices, the nurturing of disciples, these things are preventative. And that's a big reason why I think you see that evidence of longevity. It's preventing more severe cases or any case whatsoever long term. And a lot of that, again, going back to the topic of mental health, it's the almost every one of these studies talks about reduced anxiety, reduced stress, reduced depression. It's the mental health benefits of church community, of purpose, of all the things that we're doing and nurturing in our church. And next slide, Chip. And so that's where I see this strong connection between mental health and physical health, and why I wanted to kind of open us up with this wider framing, because these connections are there. And what I don't want you to hear me saying, I probably should have done this earlier, is that all of this is statistical. And when you're looking at statistics, that doesn't mean everybody receives these benefits. This doesn't mean people in churches do not get cancer. do not have high levels of stress, do not experience major depression. Doesn't mean that at all. It means on average, if you take a population of people, the population that's in the church and the population that's not in the church, one fares better than the other. And you all know this. You know that in the church, people of faith are not immune from illness and suffering of all different sorts. But there do seem to be real benefits, pretty generally, pretty widely, to what we do in church. And so next slide, as we wrap up here, I really want to encourage you as church leaders to do what you do, to build healthy community, to nurture disciples, to create opportunities for worship and spiritual practices, and to understand that what you're doing has real benefits that can be shown empirically amongst the people that you are serving. Again, it's not going to cure everybody. It's not going to prevent every disease, but on average, what you're doing is really, really valuable. So much so that some medical professionals want to refer their patients to you, to the care that you can provide. And so I just want to end with that encouraging note, and then let's open up for some questions and responses. What kind of reactions are people? Is this new information to me? Go ahead, Lisa.
Do you know if anybody has done studies separating out the social component? In other words, doing a study looking at equivalent social interaction in a non-religious setting, and what percent of the variance is factored in with the social component.
Right. So researchers are definitely trying to do that work. I think most of it is pretty inconclusive right now. So Dr. Bruce, the video I was trying to show earlier, he is trying to go the other direction and find out if there's something about our faith, something uniquely about what we do as Christians that is a factor here. And then others that are trying to go the other way, can you mirror this social support in other settings? And does it confer those similar benefits? And I think there's so many factors here that it's really hard to parse out those details and those really specific causes and then to determine this is a bigger factor than that. Studies do it, studies make claims, but then the next study often comes around and says, oh, maybe not. And so a part of what I was trying to do here was kind of sort out a little bit things that seem to be fairly established from those that are just the latest study from so-and-so that argues this, out of context of other studies that are either were before it or that might come after it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
As I was listening, I was thinking about the difference between virtual church and in-person church on these things. And I have been, this presentation made me think differently about my comfort level with virtual church, because I have been thinking this is happening, whether we encourage it or not, it's happening. We need to make it the best it can be, rather than this, because I suspect if they do these studies in 10 years and look at the difference between people that were participating in person and people who are participating virtually, they're going to discover that the benefits are quite different for people in those different ways of participating in church. And so as I was listening, I was really convicted about the importance of being together in person. Of course, when it's safe to do so, not when we're in the middle of a pandemic, we did the best we could, but as it has become safer to join together in person, that these benefits would come. Do you have any insight, Drew, on if my hunch is correct that they would find those differences?
Yeah, I can't say I'm expert enough in the medical research and the science aspects to say anything definitively. But our reaction at Science for the Church, some of the first newsletters I wrote as the pandemic was really settling in that first spring and early summer, were about the ways that we are wired for relationship, and that a screen just isn't the same as a hand on the back, a hug, a look in the eye. There's just so many things that we do. I mean, our brains are incredibly attuned to mannerisms and gestures and just these signals that our bodies give in the way that we communicate. We are fine-tuned to be in relationship in a very significant way. And when you take that away, I think that is, I mean, you just, study after study is just showing how we turn to substances, how levels of depression, how suicide, I mean, just everything has gone really, really bad since the pandemic. And I think one of the big factors there is the fact that we are made to be in groups together, and we weren't able to do that. And it was really, really hard for people to navigate and to manage. And so my hunch is that's where the research will go, but it'll be interesting to see. I do think there has been some research that suggests relationships that you have pre-existing can be better mediated online than new relationships. And so for those that have been in the church for 20 years and they just interacted on Zoom during the small group or the Bible study or the Sunday school class, it might not have as negative effect because they have that history together. But my hunch is if they stayed virtual for really long periods of time, it would start to have an impact. But it's all research that scientists are doing, and science takes time. We learned in the pandemic the dangers of letting people see science play out in real time, because it changes. One study says this, something changes in the next study, and it says that, and they have to keep iterating to find what's the right methods to get a kind of result that we can be confident in. And these studies on spirituality they're really complicated, especially when people are factoring in God, who in some way, shape, or form is outside the natural world, outside what science can talk about. If God's factoring in here, that just really muddies research science. And so researchers just have to be really, really careful. And, there's all the debate, what's the right control or comparison group for this sort of work that mirrors what happens. It's really hard to have a control group for something like a faith community. Yes, Francie.
I think this kind of tags on to what you were just saying, but getting back to the people joining in on our worship virtually, I would be interesting also to see any studies done with people we had people in my churches who were had previously been very active in the church, then for whatever reason now age or issues, health issues, were not able to come to church anymore. We would visit them as homebound people, but then when Zoom started to be worship option, they started joining us on Zoom, back to doing something that they were not able to do before. We actually had a lady, we started noticing she was dressing up and putting on makeup, and she was looking better every week as she found that she got to be part of the worship with us again. And so, so for those who were unable to be part of things, the whole COVID Zoom online experience may have actually been a positive.
Absolutely. There's many people whom they stay connected to the church when they're on vacation, because now they just need to log onto their computer for 90 minutes or however long. I've heard many, many stories, my own church and many others, of people shopping. I'm moving to your area. I'm going to check out the different churches on Zoom. And then when they arrived and we were in person, they were there in the pews because they picked this church or that church. So I think there's real benefits. And there are people that struggle in big groups, that they have social anxieties and other things. And the virtual church, I think for them may be a really good thing. But for many people, I think it's just the opposite, that not having that social interaction can be a really bad thing. That the research is, I've seen lots of competing claims, and it's hard for me to sort out, but the research on young people and their use of electronic devices, is social media bad for us, or is it neutral, or is it good? Lots of research, lots of debate, but I think there's pretty good evidence that suggests a lot of the increases in mental health concerns among teens are related to the fact that they're interacting through a device, not face-to-face with their peers, the way previous generations did. Now, there's benefits for those that can maintain relationships across distances that could not happen at the same way before. So it's complicated, but again, we're wired to be in relationship and to be in community. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that the church does. It's one of the things I most value in the church. And it's not surprising that God would create us to be relational through a long evolutionary process, and then God would have a church be a form of community that allows us to thrive in those relationships and in our relationship to God. It makes great sense to me that that's how it all seems to have come together. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Lisa.
I'm wondering if there's an element of intentionality and active seeking versus a more passive response that you have with a virtual community. The fact that, you have to get up, get dressed, put a little skin in the game, so to speak, in order to get to church. So you've had to increase your effort in order to participate. And I know there is research that shows when you have to put effort into something, the reward component is greater than if you haven't had to put any effort in. And surprisingly, if you charge a small amount of money versus offering something free, people have a higher value of it.
Right.
And so I wonder if there's just, if the reward pathways in the brain are more activated when there's effort involved.
Yeah, I think that may be true, but I also think prior to the pandemic, for many churchgoers, it was a habit. It wasn't that much extra effort. It was just what we always did. And for some, there was a transition away and back into, or for some it was constant, but for many people, it was just a habit that almost had to be broken. Where I think for others who are, and there's certainly evidence for this, a lot of people started asking theological and spiritual questions during the pandemic and started seeking. And so I think you are right for individuals where church and community are new to them, or for individuals where a church community hurt them, which sadly has happened all too often. I think those are circumstances where the virtual, the lower bar of entry is good, but ultimately I think we really thrive when we're together, when we're able to meet in person and have that physical contact. And there's research on the benefits of singing together. You don't get that on your couch or in your bed zooming into a service. So just all of those things I think are factors to kind of consider. And as church leaders know, different people you treat in different ways, and I think it's good that we have different entry points, and we just continue to try to create community. I mean, a lot of churches now have pastors for the online audience during the church worship service. That's a great idea. How do you build community? How do you value them? How do you show them that they're important even when they're not in the building? And I think a lot of good can be done through something like that. So there's lots of space for creativity. In the end of the day, Chip's initial question, what will the evidence say later on? we've got to wait. We probably got another 3 to 5 years to really, be able to say somewhat definitively what impact the pandemic had in this shift to virtual church. Sadly, I think the one that is pretty evident is the number of people that have stopped coming to church. Whether that reverses, I don't know, but it's certainly the pandemic did not help, even though some people seem to express more interest in finding a faith community as a way of coping with the pandemic. Chip, if there's no more questions, if you could pull up my slides, let me just do a quick preview of the next 2 weeks.
Could
I
I?
think Nancy has a question.
Oh, sure, Nancy, please.
My video is being really fuzzy, and I apologize for coming in late. Before everything disappears, you referred to the opening slide or an original slide with a quote, and I was wondering, finish out, but at the very end, if you could show me that slide so I can catch up just a little bit.
While Chip's pulling that up, I'm going to cut and paste it on my slide and see if that'll paste into the chat.
Perfect.
Then you'll have it, and you can cut and paste it. Where are you, chat? There you are. All right, that should give you the quote and a hyperlink to it, Nancy, and for anybody else that wants it.
I apologize.
No problem. So as I hinted multiple times, we've got a professor of psychology, recently moved to Fuller Seminary, David Wang, that will be leading us next week. And he holds the Penner Chair for the Formation of Emotionally Healthy Leaders. And all of his work has been on spiritual formation, on trauma, and on clergy health and well-being. And so he's going to lead us next week very specifically on the question of clergy mental health and clergy well-being. And so I'm excited to have David Wang join us next week. Next slide, Chip. And then the following week, we have 2 scientists, Dr. Addie Weaver, a social worker at University of Michigan, and Dr. Akeisha Smith, a clinical psychologist in Canton, Ohio. And then Susan Jennings, who's a minister of pastoral care at a PCUSA congregation in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They have all been involved in some really fascinating programs to address mental health in the church, for the church and for the wider community. And so they're going to share some of the programs they're doing and some of their insights and experiences with us on March 23rd. So I hope you'll join us for those. They will be the experts that, particularly Dr. Weaver, Dr. Smith, and Dr. Wang next week. They really know the research. They've contributed to the research in many instances, particularly around mental health. And so if you have real specific questions, please bring those and whether it's during the webinar or after the fact or through correspondence with them, I think they'll be able to help get answers for you. And then Chip, if there's time, I'm happy to do a little plug more generally for Science for the Church. I'm happy to let folks go and wrap up as well, whatever the group would like.
You're muted.
Thank you. Nobody's ever asked me to talk before. So I think, Drew, you should go for it. We've got 4 minutes. So I think you should go for it.
Sure. If you can pull up the slides, I'll show images. I like showing images because I don't like to look at myself on the screen. I'd rather look at a PowerPoint. So if you could pop that up again. So Science for the Church we're a relatively new ministry, but we grow out of some programs that tried to help Christian ministries in particular engage with science. And we've worked through those prior programs, and in our current work, we've worked with about 100 congregations over the years. And what we've seen in our evaluation work is that the church is strengthened by engaging science. And so that has become our mission statement. That's what we're trying to do. How can we bring, in the case of this webinar, science professionals that know mental health to the church in ways that can help and benefit and strengthen the church. Next slide. And so the main way we do that is through what we call the standard model. We know that most of our churches have science professionals in them. And we know that the science professionals working with the pastors, with the church staff, can do wonderful contextual things together and do things that are unique and specific to what your congregation wants or needs. And so we've got a little booklet that we've created called the Standard Model, a how-to guide, how to engage science. And that's really it. Relationships between science professionals and church leaders to do contextual programming that just makes sense in your church community. So feel free, you can go to our website and download that. Next slide. Chip has already given a nice plug for our weekly newsletter. Everyone that registers for the webinar, unless they opted out, will receive it. We'll add you to our list. We cover a range of topics. We try to spread your imagination of the ways that science might be relevant to the work of the church and to faith and to ministry. We do devotionals where we look at a passage and put it in conversation with science. We look at very practical things like what can psychology do to improve our children's ministry? Or what are ways that we can think about doing mission work in the world using science? And then a whole host of kind of scientific themes, how to introduce you to them. So we do a range of things. We profile churches, we interview scientists, but every week we produce the newsletter and we try to equip you with insights that you might not otherwise get from that pair, from that team within your church to kind of expand your horizons and equip you. And then one more slide, Chip. And then the feedback we've gotten from a lot of our audience is that people really are looking for ways to connect science to scripture. We're ecumenical. We work across the different groupings in the church, evangelical, mainline, progressive, conservative. And kind of our response to that was we tried these devotionals in our newsletter and we got really good feedback from them. And so last spring, we created a devotional. It was written by a wonderful writer and a Christian who's a biologist, Sierra Reyes Tone. And she took 7 texts about the life of Jesus and put them in conversation with what she as a biologist knows about the natural world. And so you have her reflection on the basilisk lizard, which is sometimes called the Jesus Christ lizard, which can run across water. And she puts that in conversation with the story of Jesus walking on water. Wonderful insights that you can use as an individual in a small group or a Bible study, and perhaps even preachers could get insights on particular passages from the devotional. So that's available online as well. And this year we hope to have some additional products. Chip, if you throw one more slide up there, everybody can have my email. I'm always available. I'm happy to take any questions you have, resources you're looking for, ways that we can help you and your congregation do the things that you're already doing or take on new things that are engaging with science.
Drew, thank you so very much. And thanks to all of you who have joined today. It's just a taste of what we're going to get the next 2 weeks also. So I will look forward to seeing you there. Let's close our time together in prayer. Gracious God, we're thankful for how you use the church to bring help. Lord Jesus, you are the great physician, and we thank you that among all the ways you heal us through the ways we draw ourselves close to you. And so God, Holy Spirit, we pray that you would activate our thoughts and our minds, that as we consider what we've learned today, it could shape our ministry and change the world. We pray all of this in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you.